Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 34 in the Crunchy Cobra Jet series, also known as Slither. Now, if you've not seen any of my videos on this car before, I started with an original 69 Mach 1 R-Code Cobra Jet. The car was in very bad shape. It was rusted almost to pieces. And basically the intent was to salvage as many parts of that original car as I could, which I did. Unfortunately, it wasn't very many, but I did salvage what I could, and I basically built or rebuilt the rest of the car using pretty much all dynacorn parts. I will say that the dynacorn parts have been very good for me and for this build, so if you're looking at getting something like that, I would recommend it. Now, in the last video, what I did was I finished installing the seat risers and also the bracket system that goes in the back where the trunk latch sits. The video before that, I put on the roof and the drip rails, lots of details in that, and I think you can find benefit from that even if you're having an older Mustang, you know, 65, 6, 7, 8. That should give you some details as to what you need to do to make that stuff fit. So now what I want to do is get back to the front of the car. Now, I salvaged the original shock towers, and I also salvaged the rear aprons and the upper half of the firewall, the air boxes, and the outer rocker panels, and really not much else. Now, this whole thing is sitting on a jig that I built. So if you look, you'll see this is actually a boat trailer. And what I did is I used two cars. I had a 68 coupe that is very, very straight and solid, and also the original 69 Cobra Jet, and I built that jig or basically underneath those cars. So I put on my lift, you can see there's my brother's old Studebaker up there. I had put the 68 Mustang on the lift, and then I put the boat trailer underneath, leveled it up with scissor jacks, and then I built my support system. And then what I did is I took it back off, and I took the original 69 car and set it on that jig, or the frame jig, and everything lined up just like it should. So I had two straight cars that I used as a reference. From there, I took the Cobra Jet back off of the jig, and I started using the dynacorn floor pan, put it in place, and basically built up from there. So there's a bunch of videos on this series. There's also some videos on the trailer jig. If you're interested, you can check that out as well. So as I said, I'm going to get back to work on the front end, and that's going to involve installing the front aprons and the core support, and then also the strut braces that weld to the bottom of the core support and the bottom of the frame. The advantage I have with all of this, not only do I have measurements from the car that I took apart, but I also have an original 69 Mach 1 in the back of my shop that I use as a reference for this. So I'm going to use some imagery from that. I'm going to do some video on that car so you can see what I'm trying to do, and of course show you the process of putting all this together. So let's get started. Okay, so here's a few details. On the original R-Code Cobra Jet cars, you're going to find the VIN number stamped up here on top of the shock tower. In this case, there is a little star right there, a 9R, I think that's San Jose, a 02, which is Mach 1, and R, which is Cobra Jet. So that is in both of the shock towers. When I had the shock towers media blasted, I had welded strips of metal on top to protect that area, and then I'm taking those back off and smoothing that up. So big deal there. You want to make sure you have those. Also, those shock towers have the internal extra bracing on them, so a little bit different. Usually, you know, the big block cars are built that way. Now, the other things that I did is this rear apron, the upper half was rusted really bad. So I took an aftermarket apron, I sectioned out that piece and put it in. That side was good. I didn't really do anything with that. I think I patched up a little bit on the back corner. Nothing serious or too serious on that one. Now, this apron, I have a couple of these. This one fits better, I think, than the other one that I have. And I know a lot of people get concerned with stuff like this. It's really hard to replicate the original stampings. This is as close as they can get, and it's probably they stamp one shape and then compress it and that's why it ripples like this. It is what it is. You can't really do much about it other than if you really wanted to, you could cut this out, hand form a piece, and weld it in to get rid of those ripples. Most of that will be behind the fender, so it's not that big a deal. Now, a couple other things here. I have an original set of these braces that go from the apron to the cowl, and I have some aftermarket ones. Now these, I've never been a fan of the aftermarket ones. The owner provided me with these originals. Now these are not from this particular car, but they are original to a 69. And I've already reworked them a little bit. As you can see, they had spot welds here, and those have been drilled out. And then there are spot welds up here, but what they had done is cut out the cowl, and they stayed attached until later on when I took all that apart. So these have been blasted, of course, and then I massaged them slightly to make sure all of these flanges interact with the cowl like they should. And then even down here where it's going to meet, I can press that down and it lines up. Now you'll notice also there is a gap right here. I don't like gaps, but I'm not going to change that. There's really no value in changing all of that. You can put seam sealer on there if you want, and that'll take care of that. Moving on to the other side, same situation. This is an original piece, and this is also an original piece. Now I think this one was actually from this car. And you can see I did the same thing. I cut the flange off, or basically created a flange where the cowl was. And this one is a little more beat up, let's say. So I'm going to use a matching pair or matching set to that one. And same way, I kind of massaged a little, make sure everything's going to interact well, and it fits very nicely. Again, you've got this gap underneath here. So moving forward, we have again this apron on the passenger side, aftermarket, not the greatest, fit, but it'll work. The other thing we have is a core support from NPD. Now this is for the 69 and or 70. And what that means is it comes with these plates up here on top. Because the 70, the hood pins go down through this hole and then rotate and lock. So on the 69, which I have the original one here, which is just in really, really bad condition, you can see it just has a hole. Now, what I want to do, I've already taken off this side, so this will be disposed of, won't use that. And I may have to rework this a little because it looks like it's just compressed slightly. And I may reshape this just to clean it up and then weld in these holes. We don't need those, we just need that center hole for the 69 style pin. Other than that, the core support is really accurate. You can look at where the holes are, these vent holes, even this little, I think these were for the AC lines, I think. It'll round it off like they should be, and that's the same thing here on the 69 original piece. And of course I will use this as a reference moving forward as well. The other things that I need to do, and I'll show you, here's the part numbers: radiator support bracket, right hand weld tube primer, and this one is the left hand. Now what that gets you is these two pieces. And I'll go into detail as to how these are mounted, but this is for the strut rod, and of course this will go up underneath the core support and the frame rail. Now, let me go show you the 69 car that I have, the other one, and some of these details that you can look at. One of those things I want to point out as we go back there is how this is shaped around, the top of the core support, and these holes here. And also, we're going to look at the alignment of these holes, because these will throw you off when you're looking at it. Alright, so here is my 69. I pulled the fenders off earlier so we could get a good look at this. And you'll see the shape here, as I was mentioning earlier. This is pretty squared off in comparison. On the other car, this is cut out. So it's got like just a U shape. It is what it is. I mean, that's the way they're made. You can see the shape here. how it's just a little smoother in the transition. Same thing here. And again, we just need that hole. We don't need those other two little holes. Here's the same thing on this side. And I want to show you this. You end up with the same gaps. So there's a gap underneath that. There's a gap there. Come this way. There's a gap here. You can actually see daylight down through this hole, this opening. On the other side, same thing. You've got that gap. And then you'll notice also the way these aprons sat in here, they basically just smashed this thing together. So you have this flange that creates the shock tower, and then you can see where this is just pushed over and welded in place. There's no finesse there. It's just rough it in, and that's what they did. Now, as I mentioned previously, if you look down the holes and you compare them, let's say I'll just take this straight edge, and if I go on the center line of the holes as much as I can, you'll see they're not they're not very accurate. So this one is basically on center. These are really close to the, well, it's this way, which means the bolt hole is off to the outboard side. Same way here, this is just barely making it. This one is good. Same thing back here and back here. And so I pointed this out in the previous video. When you look at the fender, it's a optical illusion, let's say, or misleading, because the fender gets wide at the front and it tapers and it gets narrow at the rear. So along with that, the hood has that same kind of shape to it. So this is just an observation. Whenever you're doing these, if you have a reference, this side's better overall. If I can line that one up, it's a little bit better. Still has this big hole and a little bit of an offset, but all of the main bolt holes line up really well. So that's a good thing. So I'm going to come up here. Now this front apron, of course, is not welded in. I'm just going to set this up close to where that's at. That hole's good. That hole's good. That hole's good. This one, just a little bit out, or a little bit inboard. I have in the past had to modify some of these on my other car, 68 I did. I ended up moving the whole hole because the fender would not line up, and it was because the new apron, they didn't have the stamp quite right, and I ended up kind of cutting it out and moving it over and putting a filler piece in to make it fit right. But as you can see, it looks like everything is slightly out of whack, right? But it's really not. Again, kind of an optical illusion. So anyway, I'm going to get started prepping up the aprons and also getting ready to take some measurements, because I want to make sure that all of this is sitting where it should be. Okay, before I take all this apart, I just want to go over some of these measurements. So if I measure from way back here against the cowl, and I come up and I basically want to go to the center line of this front bolt hole, hopefully that's in frame, that's about 42.5 is what that's showing. Now this is just sitting here. Also, I'll point out that this apron, I already know I have to trim it right here so that I can make it go back slightly. If I go to this other side and I do the same thing, same location, oh, you're gonna fight with me, okay. Here we go. This one again is about 42 and maybe 3/8 to a half. And this hole is actually kind of oblong, little sideways. The other measurement is between that apron over there and this one over here. Now this is again just loose. There's nothing really, you know, super clamped down. And this measurement is about 40 inches, maybe just a tick over 40. So those are the primary measurements that I'm going to use. You can also go to the corners. So if I took where this meets in that corner right there with the bracket that welds to the cowl, and I come up here to this corner where the hole is, and I go, that's about 58.5. And then again, I know this isn't welded in, but I'm just going to kind of demonstrate here. I know that would probably go that way just a little. This one is also at 58.5. So let's go take a look at the other car. So if I come off that cowl, like I said, and I come forward, it just doesn't want to quite lay down the way I want it to. It's wanting to fight me here. Okay, that is at 42, between 1/2 and 3/8. So that number's good. Same thing over here, measure that. This one is at 42 and about 3/8 to that. So that's a good number. The other measurement between, so I go to that apron, to this apron, basically 40 and a tick. That's what I'm seeing. Now if I go again, just kind of into that corner, I come over here, this says 58, basically 58 dead on. And come over here, and this one says 58.25. Now, more than likely, the reason that this one may be off, maybe, I'm not 100% sure if they have compensated for the battery tray slightly. I don't know. But if that is a good number. This car is square. This car has not been wrecked or anything. So 58.25 on that one. I will verify, you know, my measurements whenever I'm getting ready to put everything onto the new body, but I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing right here. All right, before I get too far along, I just want to show you this as well. This piece was attached to a complete frame rail assembly, meaning I had the shock tower, the frame rail, the forward and rear apron. And when I pieced this apart, I kept these pieces from the original car, and that's the new frame rail, and this is the new apron. I took out the shock tower and the other apron. So it's kind of a mix. That's why this is sitting here totally loose, but you also see these holes where I had drilled out the spot welds. So because I've already done that, I'm going to use these holes to attach this. I might shy away from this one a little. I don't want to weld on that. I may even trim this slightly just because I don't want to get too close to the original numbers on this. I'd rather that be seen. So I may just trim this off a little and move these holes forward so that it looks better. I like seeing that. But it's the same thing on this one. Again, this was part of a complete assembly and I sectioned it all apart. Now I know that this side, whenever I push this apron back, it's hitting on the curve here of the shock tower. So I'm gonna have to just trim that a little, but otherwise it's almost ready for this to go together. Now, something else, just to show you this, I had one of my viewers send me this. I like it for a couple reasons. One, it says Stark on it. So I think of Iron Man. But two, it gives me an opportunity to try doing some spot welds. Now I know that I had done a bunch of plug welds on the roof and all that sort of thing and on the flanges, and this would have been nice to have, but I just couldn't get myself to buy one. So I appreciate the viewer that sent me that. I'm going to unbox that and probably use it to do some of these spot welds. Like I may do these up here in the corner and this flange here, and try it out and see how well it works. So I have removed basically all of the coating, the EDP coating as they call it, from the inside and the outside of the aprons. Of course, I did reshape that one slightly. I'll have to do another mock-up test fit before I actually weld that on, but I wanted to make sure everything was cleaned up. And of course, the core support, I also did the back side of it. I couldn't get all the way up inside here. I may use something else later on, but for now, that's all taken care of. There may be a few other small spots that I'll touch up, but did the front section. And you know, these little, I call them finger wheels, they're corrosion wheels. These are available on Amazon, and let me tell you, these things are fantastic. They're not cheap, you know, they're made from by 3M, and they're very, very effective in getting this stuff off. Now I could have, I know some people would say, why don't you use a sandblaster or something like that? Well, the reality is it probably would have taken me more time to set up the sandblaster, get material, get suited up, run the air compressor. Same process, you know, time-wise. This was probably quicker and did a really good job. So now, of course, I will do another test fit and make sure that everything's going to line up and fit properly. And if it does, I may just go ahead and weld it. So I think it's looking pretty good. Okay, so I had used the finger wheel or corrosion wheel, as I mentioned, and I was trying to find something to get into this channel, and basically I just used a semi-cupped wire wheel. And what I found was it worked really well just to remove that stuff from the flat surfaces. And it'll probably be something I use more so in the future. Now, of course, I mocked up the core support again, and I verified where all the hole locations needed to be so I didn't misdrill any of those. And then I set it up on my little bench and started drilling out those locations. This works really well. I've used this cordless drill many times, and of course the battery died and I had to change it out. And then I ran into an idea. I was like, hey, wait a minute, let me check out my hole punch and see if it'll do these. And it did. And then I needed to put the holes in the upper section of the core support. And so I just got a longer drill bit and drilled through the bottom holes that I had already created, and that allowed me to drill the upper holes as well. From there, I did sand it, deburr the edges, because you know, contact is important whenever you're doing these sort of things. And also I decided to weld in the braces from the apron to the cowl. I want to make sure those were in the right spot and solid, so that when I was doing my measurements, that there was no conflict. It wasn't pushing it sideways or anything like that. So I went ahead and did that as well. Okay, I was starting to do the test fit, and I realized that I didn't have the holes in the core support. So I went ahead and made those holes happen. And now I'm just going to verify that things are going to fit like they're supposed to. Okay. The other thing I did, whoops, let me get this set right. That one's not down in there. Why is it not down in there? Huh. Well, that's weird. Ah, okay. So it's just hanging on. All right, there we go. Now I still don't like the way that hole lines up on this flange, and maybe it's just going to end up being like that. I don't know. But let me show you where we're at. So I've written down these measurements here, and these are all corresponding to the original car. That's in the back. All right, so I've got a 42 3/8, That again is from the inside of the cowl to the center line of this hole. Again, this hole isn't quite where it needs to be, so you can see it's a little oddly shaped. So that number is the same, 42 3/8 from there straight forward to both of these holes. The distance between the center line of the two holes is 41 3/4. This measurement, hole to the corner up there where the bracket is, brace is welded in, 58 1/4 on from the passenger side to the driver's side. And here, this measurement was 58 going the same way, and also 40 inches inside to inside. So let's start off by just taking this measurement right here. From there to there, that says 42 1/2. So it could go back just a little. This one, (42 3/8). So that one's good. And I may end up having to readjust this because, you know, I did have to knock this corner down in here. We'll see if I can move it back slightly. It's 42 about a quarter, so I'm going to bring it. All right. That's, I don't know if you can see that or not. That's pretty darn close to 42 3/8. The aprons, just a hair over right there. Let me see what this measurement is. That's pretty close to 58 1/2 on that one. And this one is at 58 1/4. So this one, that's, I don't know if you can see that. It's hard to tell where I'm looking, you know, I've got this thing on my head, but I can't really tell where it's looking. So there's 58 and basically 1/4 to that one. So this one is supposed to be at 58. If I have to, I'll modify this opening. That's still 58 1/4. All right, so I got to make sure. I may do a little more measuring, partly with this apron. I got to see how that looks because this one's fairly close to the inside there. This one has a wider gap. Let's go look at the other car. Yeah, that's pretty wide. I wonder if I could take, oh, you know what? I could probably come in underneath the cowl. And that puts me at dead on 58. Going that direction. Yeah, that's still a little bit wide. You would think that it should look something like this when they're done, right? So maybe this notch isn't in the right spot. Trying to use that as a reference. Slide this out slightly. Okay. So I may have to modify that. Yeah, you would think those should line up nice and square. But, you know, they just stamp these things out and hope for the best, right? You know, ultimately, here's what I end up doing. So I've mentioned this before. You know, I do all this test fitting, and ultimately I want to make sure that the fender is going to fit. To me, that's the most important thing. These holes, they can be accurate, they can be off slightly, but if the fenders don't fit, it really doesn't matter. So I will probably try to do a test fit with the fenders on it and make sure that those line up. That's the priority. And yeah, I'll do that before I weld anything. All right, so I have the front fenders just hanging on with 2 bolts, and I just set the hood in place. I wanted to see how the alignment was, and it's not bad. It gets a little bit wider at the back, but that's okay. This side is pretty good. Again, I'm just trying to make sure I have the spacing for the hood to fit in. Now, the fenders, they're fitting very nice. You can see the rocker panel there lines up the way it should. I've got a decent gap up here at the top, and the bracket for the bottom is almost dead on with the hole that it needs to be, that on the internal there on the torque box. Up here I don't have any bolts in the front, and that'll change. You know, you can index the fender, like lift up, and it'll change length essentially. So it'll also affect back here. If I lift the front, it changes your angle there at the A-pillar, and it also changes your gaps a little bit, you know, but that's normal. I just wanted to make sure I had enough space. Now on the passenger side, same thing. I don't have any of the bolts in the front here, you know, it's just kind of sitting. I did notice at this point anyway, this gap is a little bit bigger, and so I mean, you know, there's room for adjustment. Almost lined up on the rocker. Some of this we'll have to deal with the front. Again, this fender's been hit, by the way. But if I lift up on the front of the fender, the back part of the fender moves. Here we go. But if I lift up on the front of the fender, the back part moves forward. So there's room there. It's all good. So I'm going to take the hood back off and just show you what I have found with the bolt holes. So let's take a look at the bolt holes. I was right. On the core support, this is too far in that direction, because you can see the hole and you can see part of the core support overlapping that hole. This one's good, 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 and good. On the passenger side, good. We know that one's good. That one's a little close, but it's good. Good and good. Okay, so we'll take a look at the measurements here. If I start back at the front edge of the cowl on the driver's side and come forward, we're basically at 42.5. Same thing, stretch it from the cowl, come forward, we're right at 42.5. If I do the crisscross, and I'm gonna come up underneath the export brace, come across, we are at 58.5. Come across this side, again 58.5. So I'm good with that. The other thing is the side to side, and really that's about 40.1/8, so that's okay. So the other thing I did is I put in bolts here on the apron, and that's the bolts that go through to have that cover that goes over the spring, and these lined up really well, so that bolt's going to hold that in place. And on the passenger side, again, put a bolt in there. These holes aren't the best, but that's okay, because when the bolts go in with the washers, it'll cover that up. So overall, I'm ready to weld. I think everything is where it needs to be, and I'm going to weld in the aprons and Of course, I'll weld in the bottom of the core support and then get started on trying. I think I'm going to try to use that spot welder on these front edges up here. And just so you know, I did use some SEM zinc weld through primer, so I've coated the inside areas here. Normally I don't use weld through primer, but since I stripped all of the EDP coating off completely, I wanted to make sure I had something in there. And even though I don't necessarily like the weld through primer, I will use it just to try to protect what is here. And so you can see it's all been coated on any of the overlapping flanges. Okay, I've never tried one of these, but I want to show you the tips. They come very pointed, like 1/8 of an inch maybe, and that's not going to work for what I want to do. So I ground these tips down, made them broader so I'd have a better contact area, and then I got some scrap metal. Wanted to see what it would do. So basically it's got this trigger back here. If you haven't seen one of these, you squeeze the handle down, it makes contact. You push on this trigger, left or right, and it energizes the beams, the posts, the electrodes, whatever you want to call them. And you have to time it, so you count maybe 1 or 2 seconds. So if I put that together just to show you, and when I do this, it actually dims the lights a little bit. So here we go. That was like 2.5 seconds. And that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And it tells you you need to keep redressing the tips because they will wear down. Hopefully, I had a problem. Initially, I had to grind this several times to make sure it was bare metal all over. And I know I put that weld through primer on, but hopefully this isn't a big deal because the contact area is on a flange that is connected everywhere else. So it's, you know, welded to the car. They are connected in a sense. So let's see what happens. This is something pretty heavy. So I'm going to bring it in on this flange, come down here in this corner, see if it works. It did. A couple inches. All right. Make sure. Yeah, that's connected. That's a lot of work. Trying to work around these vice grips. This thing is heavy, but it is really doing a good job. That one I might need a little more help on. Ah. Nope, didn't make contact. There it is. Woo! All right, I have all of the spot welds done with the Stark spot welder. I have the plug welds done on the front box area for the core support. Again, more of these with the spot weld tool. Plug welds here, plug welds there, plug welds everywhere. And I'm happy with this whole front section. Now we have the next step, and that is these, the strut rod brackets, whatever you want to call them. These I'm going to show you on the original car. There's really not much that holds these in, to be honest. If you look at, in this case, this is the original core support. These were just welds on the edge of the front of the piece that I cut out, and there was also some edge welds here. Here it had like 4 welds on the edge. I do believe there was some sort of a plug weld or something here that broke loose, and again, not much here. So let me show you on the original car just how poorly these are installed. Again, this car has not been wrecked or damaged or cut apart or anything. So here is the left side. The straight edge goes towards the front. This kind of lumpy edge goes to the back. Now, if you look at these welds. Those are just horrible. I don't know what they used to weld this back in the day, but that's just like somebody's learning how to weld. Same way over here. Just barely doing anything. It looks like there may be maybe a plug weld there. And I don't know if this is part of it or not, because there's this inner box here, and that looks like it's on the edge of that as well. If we go to the bottom, I don't know how well that shows up. You've got some edge welds here. That's really it. There's nothing on these sides, on either side. It looks like probably a plug weld or two, but that's it. There's almost nothing holding these on. Same way over here. They weld on the edge, and like I said, there's a plug weld there, plug weld there, and back here, I mean, there's just not much. That's just undercoating coming loose there. So I don't know if these were spot welded together, I guess, but there's nothing on the edge here. And this part here, this sway bar bracket, you can see this kind of interacts with that lumpy section goes in this area here, and it sticks out a little on this frame rail. So these I'm not going to say are super critical, because there's a lot of play in this bushing, and this gets adjusted fore and aft whenever you want to move the lower control arm. So as long as you're close, I don't think it's that big a deal. So I'm going to try to replicate this as best I can. And you can see the sway bar bracket has a joggle in it to make space for these. So let me see if I can get one of these lined up and have another look at it. I think there's only so many ways you can measure this. So what I've done is I've come from this inner flange right here, and I've come across, and basically it's about 10.5 inches to the outside of the frame rail. So that's one dimension. Another one is I measured from this edge on the frame rail back to this edge, and I got about 14.5 inches, somewhere close to 14, maybe 14 5/8, something like that. Okay, now this is considering that this may not be the exact same shape as the original. And then I also measured from the mount point for the control arm forward, and that again is 7 3/8, somewhere in that range. And those numbers appear to be pretty consistent with the numbers on the old car, or the original car. So again, that inside edge to the outer frame rail, 10.5. But measuring from the front to that edge is 14.5. So there's probably some leeway there because the piece may not be exactly the same as the original. And again, there's so much play in that rod that I don't think it's that critical. As long as you're close, should be good. Also, there's a little sticking out here, and that's the same thing I did on the new one. And if we look at it from the top, you can see where that edge dies into that cutout, and there's a little sticking through this hole. Same thing here, that dies in the same spot, and a little sticking through that hole. So I think that's good. Now I'll probably over weld this as I normally do. I may put some holes in here and weld into the top of this. I may drill some holes in the top here and weld to this. I will also weld this edge just like they did, only I'll try to make it look prettier. I'll weld this front edge. I may put a plug weld or two in there. And over here I'll probably put a plug weld in there and a couple more inside of here. Just try to get it as strong as I can. So here's the plan for the driver's side strut rod bracket. I took some tape and I laid it up against the bottom of the core support and in the angle where it was up against the sway bar bracket. Now that I have that location, the plan is I'm going to drill 3 holes on the bottom where it goes to the core support, and probably about 5 holes where it goes against the bottom of the frame rail. Then the plan is going to be that I'm also going to drill 2 holes here, never mind the leaf, 2 holes here in the bottom of the sway bar bracket, and then once I get it in place, I will edge weld just like they did at the factory, and also I will edge weld here on the front edge as well. I think that's going to be plenty to hold that in place. All the holes are drilled and deburred, ready to go. I also drilled the holes inside on the brackets for the sway bar, and I stripped off the EDP coating and sprayed it with weld through primer. So now to get this welded on, and that's going to wrap up the front sheet metal. So they're in, and I'm sorry I tried, but I couldn't make the weld as ugly as the original car. plug welds in the brackets for the sway bar, and of course plug welds down there on the bottom, and also in the front, good solid welds. So yeah, I think that might be the end of the welding, or the bulk of the welding for the sheet metal. I know there's still a few small things I want to address, but overall I think yeah, I think that might be it. Okay, I think that is the end of the major welding for this car. The whole shell is built, the frame rails are in, torque boxes, Detroit speed mini tubs. Oh wait, I do have to add one bracket. Yeah, one plate on the bottom of the frame rail to finish the Detroit speed mini tub. And there's a few small brackets inside the car that'll have to be put in. But really, yeah, that's it. I think that's the bulk of the welding. So, woohoo! Now, the next part of this series, let's say, I want to mock up the doors, make sure they're going to fit, which I'm pretty confident they're going to fit like they should, and of course the fenders. And from there, yeah, it's probably going to end up on the rotisserie. I want to make sure the bottom of the car is all taken care of, get it in primer and sealant and all that sort of thing. So there'll be a lot of follow up on that with seam sealer and different things like that. But yeah, getting excited. So with all that said, thank you again for watching my videos. If you would like and share, help build this channel up some. I need all the help I can get. Even though I put out what I feel are really good educational type of videos and somewhat entertaining, I don't get the views and stuff that I really think I should. And unfortunately, it's just the way YouTube is. But anything you can do to help will be appreciated. Also, I want to thank my patrons. If you want to support me in another way beyond YouTube, I have a Patreon account. There is a link in the description below. It can be as little as $5 a month, but every dollar helps keep me doing this job and doing this type of thing. So again, thank you to my patrons, and I look forward to the next video. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. And for just a brief intermission, how about some smoked cream cheese? We've never tried to do this, but we've had friends make it, and it's really good.